Well, when asked how she wanted to be introduced today, this newsmaker replied, and I quote, "Professional pain in the ass." I have to say that's the first time I've actually said that word in front of an audience. Okay, but a more accurate description would be Renaissance woman, innovator, persistent advocate for women's reproductive rights and for separation of church and state. A native Tulsa, this newsmaker likes to say, "I graduated from Union High School when there was 15 seniors in an outhouse." At age 74, she still runs circles around most of us and beats the Mensa group at Scrabble. She holds bachelor's and master's degrees in sociology from the University of Tulsa, a master's in public health from the University of Michigan, and a master's and PhD from Columbia University. I'm worn out. In 1970, though, 3 years before the Roe versus Wade decision legalized abortion, this newsmaker founded the first pro-choice group in Oklahoma. She was a founding member of the Women in AIDS Resource Network, the first women's AIDS group actually in the country, the Incest Survivors Network, the first group of its kind in the U.S., Oklahoma Reproductive Health Coalition, Oklahoma Women's Network, Oklahoma Progressive Alliance, Tulsa Teen Pregnancy Coalition, Modern Oklahomans for the Repeal of Abortion Laws, and the Tulsa Interfaith Alliance. So how did this newsmaker get started on this path of activism? When I was 18, I had an illegal abortion that nearly killed me, she says. I ended up in the hospital where I underwent surgery to save my life. That event put me on a trajectory I never dreamed possible. She's made a career of educating women in reproductive rights. The anti-choice movement has been with us for nearly 40 years, she says. It's not going away. Young women must prepare themselves for a lifelong engagement in this critical war to protect women's reproductive autonomy, she wrote in a 2012 article titled, "Letter to a Young Activist, Don't Drop the Banner." The newsmaker stated that over the past 40 years, she has seen how these determined efforts by the anti-abortion extremists have eroded women's basic right to reproductive autonomy. We are now on the brink of losing Roe versus Wade, she says. If we lose abortion, birth control won't be far behind. Her work has brought her face to face with reproductive issues and realities. She has served as a research associate for the United Nations in Santiago, Chile, Director of Evaluation for the International Planned Parenthood Federation, Director of Women's Programs for the National Board of YWCA of USA, Associate Director of Women's Programs for the University of Tulsa Center for Health Policy Research, and Executive Director of the National Abortion and Reproductive Rights Action League, Oklahoma affiliate. Her interest in religious freedom began more than 20 years ago when she attended the first meeting of a political advocacy group called the Christian Coalition. They began their meeting with a prayer followed by a salute to the flag, and she realized it wasn't a salute to the American flag but to the Christian flag, with a pledge of allegiance to Jesus that gave life and liberty only to those who believed him. To say that she was alarmed by this pledge was an understatement. She called a friend who was also a progressive minister, and together they founded the Tulsa Interfaith Alliance, a group of mainstream people who have served as a counter-voice to religious extremists. For her activism on behalf of women and religious freedom, this newsmaker has received honors and recognition from numerous groups, including the National Organization for Women, the League of Women Voters, Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, the Islamic Society of Tulsa, the Mayor's Commission on the Status of Women, and the State of Oklahoma. Please join me in congratulating a winning woman who has truly taken women's and religious rights to a new level. Our 2013 newsmaker, Barbara Santee.
There are a lot of people to acknowledge, but I wanted particularly to thank Betty Casey. Whenever Southern Hills found out that somebody might be on the program who would say the A word, they wanted to put my table out on the 13th green. But she talked him out of it. I have a feeling of deja vu all over again, because in 1999 I accepted this award for my cousin Billy Letts, the ravishing redhead. And she couldn't be here because she accepted, because she was in California, something about some kind of movie. How did that work out for you? I don't keep up with that side of the family. See, I'm the only one in the whole family who hasn't had a movie made. It kind of makes you feel inferior. And I have some serious stuff to talk about. I'm deeply humbled. I really am deeply humbled by this, and grateful for the incredible honor. And I accept it not just for myself, but for those anonymous advocates, doctors, and clinic workers like Sue Ames and Roger Ames, who put their lives on the line every day to guarantee this most basic of all human rights, reproductive freedom. How many of us would like to work where a bulletproof vest is a job requirement? I commend the board for its courage in giving these people a voice by drawing attention to this highly contentious issue at a time when both abortion and contraception and the people who provide them are under constant attack. In my 40 years of activism, the one question I'm most frequently asked is why I became so committed to defending a controversial issue like abortion. It's very simple. I firmly believe a woman's uterus is not the property of the state of Oklahoma.
Amen.
1 in 3 women in this room will have had an abortion by the time she is 45 years old. Some 50 million women have had safe abortions since Roe, but before that, thousands more were killed and injured by illegal abortions. I was one of those women. When I was 18 years old, I left a home, a house, filled with alcoholism, poverty, and abuse. I was a naive country girl with a high school diploma, $10 to my name, and everything I owned was in a cardboard suitcase. I was completely alone and scared to death, tailor-made for exploitation, and predictably, the jackals gathered. And it wasn't long before I became pregnant. My girlfriend found an abortionist who told me to meet him at what turned out to be a rundown house in North Tulsa. I climbed up on a dirty kitchen table to have my first internal examination by a complete stranger who could have been a plumber, a fry cook, or if I were lucky, a doctor. I was terrified because I'd heard stories of women waking up to find they were being raped by their abortionist. And there wasn't a thing they could do about it because they were committing a crime. That didn't happen to me, but I left crying because he wanted $200, twice my meager salary as a typist. In desperation, I took some pills and I aborted myself. A week later, I was rushed to St. John's Hospital with a massive infection. The doctor told me if I'd waited 24 hours, I would have been dead. Before I was wheeled to the operating room, they placed a placard on my chest that read, "Incomplete abortion." It might as well have been a big red A. And for years, I never spoke about it. 15 years later, 3 years before Roe, I met with a dozen women in the basement of All Souls Church to organize the first pro-choice group in Oklahoma called MORAL, Modern Oklahomans for the Repeal of Abortion Laws. I was asked to be the chair. My religion professor at TU, Harold Hill, agreed to help me start an underground railroad to get women to safe abortions. As chair, I received the initial calls from the women. I referred them to Hal for counseling, and he put them in touch with a legitimate doctor. But the women never went to the doctor's office, and they were never told his name. Each woman was instructed not to tell anyone where she was going, to meet the doctor in a parking lot where Steve Sundry is now, to bring cash, and to come home. She was told to lie down in the back of his car, in the car seat, covered with a blanket, so she couldn't see where she was going, and she was driven to the doctor's lake home that had been converted to a clinic. Imagine how terrifying this must have been for these women. But it was necessary, because all of us were committing a felony punishable by 2 years in prison. One Oklahoma physician, Dr. Brian Henry, had already spent 2 years at McAllister. Our Underground Railroad ran for 3 years, and Harold Hill estimated he referred 3,000 women during that period. 3,000 women who were not injured or killed because he got them to safe medical care. My friend Harold Hill died last month. Every year there will be another crop of frightened, naive 18-year-old girls who will need our help. They are why I've fought so hard to keep abortions safe and legal. If my reality offended any of you, remember that your daughter, your sister, or that woman sitting next to you may be that 1 in 3. And imagine her going through these horrible experiences if we lose the protection of Roe. Regardless of your personal beliefs, is that what any of us really want? Thank you again for this incredible honor. I will cherish this award for the rest of my life.